for the Nets next season, sources told ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski. Now, earlier this week, there was all that drama surrounding Kyrie after he released that list of teams that he would consider in a trade. Here they are: Lakers, Clippers, Knicks, Heat, Mavericks, and the Sixers. But some very interesting destinations, obviously, on that list, like the Knicks. And it'd be interesting to see him play for the Sixers after Harden reportedly wanted out because of Kyrie. It's a whole thing. But anyway, Wendy, when we look at that list, what's the reaction around the league? What was that reaction when they saw this list?
Cool.
Cool. Okay. That's it?
I mean,
not fired up. We're going to get Kyrie in-house.
I know that, like, especially in other sports, you know, I mean, by the way, there are role players in the NBA who want to be traded and they provide lists. It happens. Mm-hmm. And it's always an interesting thing. And a lot of times when a team is listed on a list, it's like, oh, this is interesting. Let's have a discussion. By the way, those teams did have discussions. Some of those teams saw this coming in the last month and had discussions. Do we want Kyrie Irving here? But the demand for Kyrie Irving on a long-term contract just doesn't exist right now.
Look, this goes back to what Adrian Wojnarowski reported the other day, right? There's this list of teams out there. Hey, Kyrie, you can go seek out a sign and trade. There was one team that was willing to do it. Now it's the Lakers. Why? Because the Lakers had no other option.
Do you know why they let him go seek a sign and trade, Ryan?
Why?
Because they knew there wasn't going to be one.
So they called his bluff.
Yes. And Kyrie took the cards and said, fold.
Kyrie wanted a long-term extension in Brooklyn. This list was designed to try to get him a long-term extension in Brooklyn. It didn't work. He opted into his deal. He's now on a one-year contract in Brooklyn.
But this was nothing like the Russell Wilson list that he put out.
No,
in football, where it was like, oh my God, Russell Wilson.
The Seahawks wanted Russell Wilson on their team, and other teams wanted Russell Wilson on their team. This is a situation where Kyrie looked around and didn't have a chair except for his option, which he was contractually able to pick up.
He folded his cards, but the game isn't over. So more hands are going to be played, and so we'll see how those develop.
So speaking of that, hands that need to be played, we know what Kyrie, at least we think we know what Kyrie wants, which is to get a max deal somewhere, preferably with the Nets. What must he do to get a max deal from the Nets?
Well, it would help to be on the court and play. I mean, that would be the first step.
That would be step one.
No, but I mean, is it like 70 games and a title or anything short of a title won't make it happen?
Look,
that kind of thing.
I think, you know, as I've said many times, you can only answer Kyrie questions with maybe. Then that goes with this too. But if Kyrie Irving is on the court this season and plays well for the Nets, I mean, remember, he was an All-NBA guard 2 years ago, right? If the Nets make a deep playoff run, if Kyrie's on the court for a bunch of games, if they play well, if everything looks great, sure, something could change in the future. He could get a long-term deal for him. I'm not ruling it out.
How things had changed with James Harden over the course of 9 months. Mm-hmm. We could see things change. Kyrie was a 50-40-90 player 2 years ago. He was almost a 50-40-90 player this last year, but he only played, not as many games. If he has a good year and the Nets, profit as an organization, I think they could see it. But I think the days of Kyrie Irving getting a 4-year contract offer, which is what he was looking for here, I would be surprised if he ever gets that again from anybody.
Wow, no matter what, title even.
I mean, I'm not saying no matter what to anything because we're in the NBA. But again, step one with James Harden was helping the Sixers be in a better position to win. Step one for Kyrie Irving will be getting on the court in October.
Take it one step at a time.
That's all you can do.
And we'll see how it works out for these.
So where are we in terms of Kyrie? Because we're not the only ones who have been following this closely. Everybody else around the NBA, he wants to go to the Lakers. What's the situation there?
Yeah, so one of the big challenges, he makes $36 million, as we know, because he picked up that option. Mm-hmm. It's hard to trade a $36 million contract. It's especially hard to trade a $36 million contract if you're in a restructuring situation with your team. You're not looking to take on $70 million or $100 million over the next couple of years. So the amount of players that the Nets can sign, we also don't know. Maybe they trade Durant, maybe they trade his one player for 4 or 5 players. And then you don't have the roster spots to now break it down. So first off, I think the Nets are going to have to wait and see what they do for Durant. And then they're going to have to evaluate, do they want to take on money? So Kyrie is
he's kind of along for the ride.
Yes, and his value is very low. He's going to be a rental player at best. He wanted to be in Brooklyn, allegedly, and look the way he behaved. What happens if he got sent to a place he didn't want to be? And so he's made it clear he wants to be a Laker. The problem is the trade that makes sense is Russell Westbrook. Okay, that's great. The Lakers fans are in tears over that development. But Russell Westbrook makes $47 million.
Right.
The trade
11 million more, right?
The trade actually, it works in terms of the NBA trade rules, but it doesn't work on the books.
Especially because the Brooklyn Nets are already way into the luxury tax, and you add $11 million on top of that, you're now going backwards from talent level, and you're going upwards
Anna,
in luxury
get
tax.
this.
Jalen, your thoughts?
If they trade Kyrie, they owe him $5 million trade bonus too.
Oh, don't even. I didn't hear that. Jalen?
20-year veteran. I can't see the show, but I think I look good, and I know I can hear you. But back to what I was saying. So here's the deal. Kevin Durant, it's okay to admit when you made a mistake. That's what I meant when I said it takes courage to be happy. Kevin Durant is admitting, guys, that he's taking the onus on this because he's breaking up with both of them. He's breaking up with the Nets, and he's breaking up with Kyrie. Just think about this. If the Nets would have gave Kyrie a long-term deal, he would have signed it. KD's already under contract, and he wants to leave. He realizes that when he looks back at his journey, he's played with some of the best players in the entire league, Kevin Durant. And he's shown playing with those guys he can be elite. But in leaving the Golden State Warriors, he underestimated the journey that Kyrie Irving already had with not wanting to play with LeBron, how he got out of Boston. So he allowed him to be the big little brother and take the lead because the first year Kevin Durant was going to be injured. So he needed Kyrie to hold it down. So now that KD sees that he's not going to change Kyrie and he can't fix the Nets as they just traded for Ben Simmons while he's injured, he's breaking up with both of them. So that's where I like.
I want to get to this, Wendy. We've been talking about this before the show, during the show, about a potential trade proposal for Kyrie that an NBA exec brought up to you. So you're just the messenger.
It's not just an NBA exec.
Okay.
Multiple.
Oh, okay.
So obviously when Kyrie opted into his contract, it looked like he closed the door on the Lakers. And then the Lakers' dream of getting a potential Hall of Fame player for $6 million still in his prime died. And that was obviously very sad for Laker fans. If the Kyrie reunion coming back to the Nets hits some bumps, and they explore the possibility of, you see, I said if. There's people in this league, agents, executives believe that talks with the Lakers could be restarted. And so you say, well, how can they possibly get him? Why would the Nets ever consider taking Russell Westbrook for Kyrie Irving? Why would the Lakers consider paying draft picks? And the reason is because in a potential trade like this, the Lakers would save $11 million in actual salary and potentially up to $30 million when you include the luxury tax. So right there is enough as a reason to include potentially a first-round pick in the deal. And if this were to happen in the offseason, the Lakers would potentially be able to have some more flexibility with other salaries. So I am not going to sit here and tell you that I think that this is going to happen in the next 2 days. But if the Nets don't get to a place with Kyrie Irving where they think that things will improve, I think they could revisit this. And depending on what else the Nets might be looking at, I don't think it's impossible that this could be looked at down the line.
I mean,
so
Brian,
the proposal, wait, I just want to clarify this. The proposal is this: Kyrie Irving for Russell Westbrook and
draft compensation.
And we're talking about 1 or 2 first rounders?
Let's negotiate. I mean, because it would save the Lakers an extraordinary amount of money. There's value in that.
Just the mere thought of this is mind-blowing. On so many levels. Tim, would Durant play with Westbrook? How would Westbrook fit in all this? Would the Nets do this? Would they even be a contender after this? Please.
If Brian's saying that the Lakers would save money so they have to include draft picks is the laughable part of this. I understand where executives are coming from, given that the Lakers are the only team interested in trading for Russ. The Lakers would have to do this because they are a desperate team that has no other way of competing for a championship than if Kyrie Irving, as you said, a potential future Hall of Fame player, falls in their lap because of how ridiculous the situation is with the Brooklyn Nets. They would have to offer multiple picks. They'd have to offer Russell Westbrook. They would have.
But would the Nets take this deal?
No, the Nets would not have interest in this deal. And the reason why
today they wouldn't.
Listen,
but let's see what happens with Kyrie.
As Adrian said earlier, if the Nets get to a point where this Kyrie thing blows up, the fact that he's on a 1-year deal is going to bring a lot more people into play than just the Lakers, because you wouldn't be talking about necessarily committing to him beyond this season. So they wouldn't have to go take this deal with the Lakers. The other thing, as Brian's talking about, it would save the Lakers a ton of money to do this deal. It would cost the Nets a ton of money to do this deal, right?
Which is another reason why there'd be draft compensation.
Well,
I mean,
yes.
I don't want to devolve into too hypothetical on top of a hypothetical, but you have to also realize that if you're going to trade for a guy like Kyrie Irving, you don't necessarily want to rent him if it's going to cost you stuff. So if you want to trade Kyrie, you want to maybe trade for him if he wants to stay.
Well, but the issue is not a lot of people want to buy into Kyrie. I think teams would potentially rather rent. I mean, I think that is to me that is the appeal of this situation, is you're not buying.
But I have to say the other side of this on the Nets side is they're getting the expiring deal of Russell Westbrook, which is a value to them.
And
right?
they have the draft picks that they got from Philadelphia
right.
in the Harden trade, and they would have draft picks that they potentially would get from the Lakers that they could then reroute. It also may determine, Ryan, on what Russell Westbrook looks like this season.
Right.
How his situation develops in Los Angeles, because we have a team in Los Angeles saying, Russ, we want a different Russ next year. And we have a team in Brooklyn saying we want a different Kyrie next year, both on big one-year contracts. And so if there's turbulence on either end, what the league executives are saying is keep an eye on those two.
Real quick, does Kyrie want to be in LA right now?
I don't know what Kyrie wants.
Okay, what do you think?
I think Kyrie wants to be on a long-term deal with the Brooklyn Nets. That's what he wanted this entire time. The fact he opted in was because he couldn't get that. And everything else he was trying to do was secondary to that. That was his first thing. I want to sign with the Nets long-term. The Nets didn't want to do it.
Okay, but he might still want to be in LA. I won't let it go. I don't know why.
Listen, I think Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant want to play together. I think that is what they, at a number one level, that's what they want. That's why this whole situation has played out the way it has.
And this is what makes the NBA so